From the nation's capital in Washington, D.C., Cole on Congress. The program discussing national issues that affect Oklahoma. Your host, U.S. Representative Tom Cole.
Thank you for joining me today for another episode of Cole on Congress. Today we're joined by my good friend Congressman Wally Herger, who represents the 2nd District of California. Wally's currently the ranking member of the Ways and Means Health Subcommittee. In this role, he's been a vocal opponent of President Obama's health care plan. This year, Wally was chosen by Republican leadership to help develop an alternative health care plan using low-cost, common-sense solutions. He's here today to share his thoughts on this critical issue of health care and how it will affect you. Congressman, it's great to have you here. And I got to add personally, you're just one of my favorite guys in Congress because no matter how bad it gets, you're always upbeat and optimistic, and we can change this thing and we can win. And I admire that. I think that's what it takes to get up every morning and go after it.
Well, Tom, thank you very much. And it's always easy. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to like people who think just like you do, as I mentioned to you? But we were talking earlier about how our districts, you have a great district in Oklahoma. I have a very rural area. Most people think of California as San Francisco, Los Angeles. But I have a very heavy agriculture district just in rural north of Sacramento. Some of the richest agriculture in the world. Second largest rice producing area, grows a lot of tree crops, walnuts, almonds, and then the northern 40% are some 9 national forests, Mount Shasta, Mount Lassen. But I think of the great people I represent, and I grew up on a cattle ranch and a family business, small family business there, but I think of the people I represent, how much similar it is in many respects to the great area that you represent.
Well, the cattle ranch rings right at home. We have 14,000 farms and ranches in the district, so it's big cattle and wheat country and peanut, cotton, those kind of crops. Not quite as green as your area, though, I'm afraid, but very, very much dependent on agricultural prosperity. Do you have any minerals in your district, oil and gas, anything like that?
We have a little, not like you do in Oklahoma, but near the area where I live, they have some gas wells there, but nothing like
we may drag you into a little discussion about cap and trade because I know your insights on that on Ways and Means would be helpful. But let's start with the health care bill. And I'd like to get first your description. You were right in the middle of the terrific battle, which I think turned into much more of a fight than most people in the country thought it would over the Democratic health care bill in the United States House. And we may speculate a little bit in a minute about what's going on with our friends on the Senate side because we're in the middle of that right now. But I'd like to give you to give your description of the Democratic health care bill and what concerned you the most about it when you, as really our top Republican on that issue, began to examine it.
Well, Tom, the more you find out about the health care bill, the more concerned you are. It reminds me back to 1994 when Hillary Clinton came out. They called it the Hillary health care bill, where they came out, and the more you found out about it, and particularly the government taking over this one-payer European Canadian type style where the government knows best, basically, the more you find out about it, the more concerned that the American public becomes. And so it was in our bill. We started off this year, of course, we look at our numbers. Numbers aren't very good on our side. The other side has 81 vote margin in the House of Representatives. All they need is a majority vote to pass anything. In the Senate, of course, they have a filibuster proof, 20 votes over there. So starting this year off, looking at what they were talking about doing, and you mentioned cap and trade, cap and tax, $2,100 per average family just on this unbelievable climate change bill of penalizing our people. I mean, whether it was in that area or health care, it pretty much looked like whatever they wanted they were going to pass and shoot through. Well, the more the American public began finding out whether it was this unbelievable energy tax, which we came before, just before the July 4th work recess, where they only passed it, I believe it was by 5 votes. out of the House with
7, I think 219 to 212.
7-vote margin, and again, 81 votes they have. They broke arms there.
Yeah, we actually had 44 Democrats vote with us, so it was pretty big. We almost got that one.
It did, and that we saw the same thing developing with health care. The more the American public became aware of what was in this health care bill. And so we saw the health care bill come before us before the August work recess. It's now been over in the Senate here for a while, but we had this 2,100-page bill that literally was given to us about midnight, or about somewhere between midnight and 3 a.m. the morning before we were voting on it. And then 9 a.m. the next morning we were voting on it, that no one had read, their side hadn't read. And they voted it out we had a hearing that went until about 1 a.m. the next day, having a hearing on a bill no one really knew what we were talking about, even though the key witnesses had just barely read it, if they had. And it was passed through, and of course the big play has been over in the Senate. But we remember the town hall meetings many of us had during August, and of course the big issue was health care. And it didn't matter where you were, whether you were in your more traditional thinking area of Oklahoma or mine in Northern California, or out in the very blue, very liberal areas of the Northeast. The reaction of the American public was basically the same in these town hall meetings. People didn't like it. And then to see this administration, and bless her heart, from fellow Northern California, from San Francisco, Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker in the House, and Harry Reid in the Senate, put down those who were upset with it, who had read it, indicating they were radicals, that they were extremists, that they were terrorists, even being implied by some. Just poured gasoline on the fire of regular citizens who were concerned that they were going to lose their health care the way they had it. And yet, rather than deal with what the big concerns were, which were rising health care costs, which is a very valid concern, rather than dealing with that, we were going to see the costs go even higher. Again, it's just unbelievable, outrageous, and that's what we've been dealing with all this year.
Let's talk about some of the features of that particular bill, the Democratic health care bill. Probably the one in my area that people heard the most about was the so-called public option, which is really a nice way of saying a government-run health care plan that would be a choice. Now, our Democratic friends suggested that very few people would use it. It would just add some competition to the system. But we had other studies that suggested that literally millions of people would be forced from their current health care plans into this, and that you would have private companies beginning to drop the insurance they provided their employees, paying 8% or so payroll tax, and saying, look, you can now go get your insurance over here in this government program. How do you assess this public option?
Well, Tom, you pretty well, in a nutshell, assessed what was there. It was being sold as something to bring competition. Now imagine anyone competing with the federal government. The federal government doesn't have to turn a profit. They can lose money. They can lose money every year. They can borrow all the money they need from China. And they're competing against a private firm that's trying to offer insurance who can't do those things. They can put out any price they want on a health care plan, and you've summed up pretty much what the numbers were. Let's say you're a small business person, like our family still has a small business, or you're in any business. And many of these businesses are paying as much as 11 or 12% of their payroll is going to their health care costs. Now, let's say you have a government comes in, supposedly for competition, they say. Now, they can subsidize it, subsidized by the American taxpayer, or debt on our children and grandchildren, as we see taking place. They come in and say, well, it's not going to cost you, Mr. Employer, 11 or 12%. We're going to give it to you for 8%. Now, what employer who's out there has to stay in business, particularly during these down economic times, but is competing with the business next door, who maybe they're going to take this 8%, what happens is that the employee, our constituents, no longer have a choice. that employer isn't going to give you the choice of it's going to cost them 11% or going to cost them 8%. You now are basically stuck with a government plan. Government knows best. They determine what you're going to get. They determine basically what's going to be in that plan, whether you like it or not.
Now, in the original bill, on the House side at least, what were the mechanisms that the Democrats chose to finance this bill? We know it's going to be an expensive piece of legislation. They were talking minimum of $1.3 trillion over the first decade, even though we were going to pay 10 years worth of taxes, but only get 6 or 7 years worth of, quote, benefits, unquote. What were as you guys wrestled with the bill in the Ways and Means Committee, what kind of financial mechanisms did you see there and then later on the floor?
Well, again, you mentioned the numbers. And we're talking trillions, 1.3 trillion, 1.4 trillion. We used to talk hundreds of billions, remember, when we had a deficit?
I used to think that was a lot of money.
I mean, that was a lot of money then. So we're talking about costs that are 3 times more than what the largest deficit we ever had, about $400 billion back just a year ago. Just a year ago is what we're talking about numbers. And part of that financing was going to come through, they were going to cut back what they're paying hospitals by about $800 billion, $700 and some billion, who are already being underfunded. They were going to cut back what they're paying doctors. And what does a hospital or a doctor do if they're being cut back and they're being paid less than what it is? They cost shift. So then now they're charging, the insurance companies, the ones who are the private sector that's paying, they are going to be cost shifted. So a lot of this would be cost shifted to health insurance, driving the costs even higher.
Well, and don't we already see that now? I mean, the statistics I see suggest that Medicare, let's just take them because they're the largest government-run program, only reimburses providers, doctors, nurses, hospitals at about something like 83% of what it really costs to take care of the patient. So if you're in the private, again, they move over and private insurance pays more for the very same services, not only to provide a profit for the provider, but to cover the loss that they've already assumed when taking care of people in government programs.
Exactly. A double hit. They not only have to pay to keep themselves in business, but now they're subsidizing what the government doesn't pay. And who ultimately pays? The employer, i.e. the employee, because that money that the employer now has to pay in increased health care costs because the government isn't paying their fair share. And we haven't even talked about Medicaid, which pays even less than that, maybe 60% or so. But they're paying that, and that means there's that much less money that would be going to that employee in the form of a salary or in his paycheck every month. So it is a double hit for the citizens.
What about the tax component of this? Because we know it wasn't all going to be, in spending cuts out of existing government programs, but a pretty healthy tax component as well.
Major tax component being charged again to employers that would be hit with higher taxes here, and at a time, again, taking out of the economy, at a time when our economy is on a downturn, when we need to be, it means that much later that someone's going to be hiring an employee, maybe more will have to be laid off. Again, a total between what they're going to charge in more taxes and what they're going to be charging in Medicare paying cuts, it's about $1.4 trillion. Incredible hit.
Enormous amount of money.
And the bottom line is this: we need to, I think, get focused back to what is the big problem in our healthcare system today. What is it that the government and we as elected officials should be correcting? It's that rising healthcare costs. So what they're doing, not only are they not addressing it, and we haven't even got into that because there's a number of things that we as Republicans have offered in programs that would help bring down these costs, legitimately bring them down. But what we see, not only are we not addressing it, we're driving the cost even higher to the tune of $1.3 trillion or so.
Well,
one last thing, Tom, not to interrupt you, but it's interesting how they finance it. It's even cost more than what they're saying, because it's interesting. Here in Washington, we go at these 10-year plans. Now, those of us know in business or even as a family, it's hard to plan for a year, 2 years, let alone trying to estimate what something's going to cost 10 years down the line. But it's interesting, the taxes grow up. The cost cuts to hospitals and doctors begin immediately, but the insurance, the actual what you're getting doesn't begin till 4 years down the line. So we're paying for this for 10 years, but we're only getting the product for the last 6 years.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you about that. So you actually made the point, because I've heard Judd Gregg, our budget ranking member in the United States Senate from New Hampshire, I think has done a great job in this debate, make the point that actually this is a better than $2 trillion bill if you really look at it, income versus expenditures over any 10-year period when both are in play. So it's very, very expensive.
And Tom, you're in your 4th year, and you've been watching this process for a long time, and we all know your 4th term. We all know how this works. If the government projects it's going to cost this much, have we ever seen it ever come in at that? It's usually double or triple what the actual numbers come in.
That would be a wonderful experience. I'll hang around here for a while, see if that ever happens, that we actually did something that cost less. Although Medicare Part D actually did cost less than we projected, so occasionally we do it. Let me ask you this, and then we're going to talk about some maybe the alternatives, things that we should have looked at and didn't. But the other big concern I hear when I'm at town meetings or whatever, well, we know that it's going to force us into a government-run plan. We don't like that. We know it's going to cost us more because we got estimates, CBO, Congressional Budget Office, others, that our premiums are going to go up, that our taxes will have to go up, that we're going to have cuts in Medicare for seniors that we don't like. The other thing that they were worried about, they would say, is rationing. Is there any chance that services would be rationed, that we would somehow have people denying us benefits that we've been able to get in the past?
Tom, all we have to do is look around other places where they have government-run programs. We can look to Canada, we can look to the UK, we look to Europe. That's exactly how they control prices. Just looking to Canada. Canada has a safety valve on theirs. When you wait 3 and 4 and 6 months or even a year for a test on cancer, which every day you don't get to a cancer, you don't detect it and then treat it, your chances of living, by the way, our chances here are 30 to 40% better that your life expectancy has increased on cancer in either the UK, Britain, or in up in Canada because of how long it takes to get to them. We're seeing that you see this rationing. And the way they ration is that they just don't give it to you. You wait in lines. So you wait for something. And so in Canada, many people we see will come down to the United States to get health care, where they'll just come down and pay for it rather than wait up there for what they have. So the way we've seen them do it in other government plans is they will ration it. You will get less of it. You wait longer to get it.
Well, our mutual friend Tom Coburn, who you served with in the House and, of course, now represents us in the Senate, told me once, he said, the greatest strength of American medicine versus anybody else is that the time between diagnosis and treatment is minuscule. When we know you've got a problem, we start treating you the next day. He made exactly the same point you're making, that that's not true in a lot of other countries around the world. And what that does to survivor rates in cancer over a 5-year period is just breathtaking, how many people lose their life because the treatment didn't come immediately after the diagnosis.
And of course, you're a good senator, a good friend of both of ours. Tom Coburn is a physician himself and knows firsthand being able to see
He really does. Well, in this debate where I think we've been pretty ferocious in our criticism of the president's plan, the Democratic plan, we've often been accused of not having any ideas. Now, I'm up here enough to know we've put a lot of ideas on the table that had to do with lowering costs, and if you lower cost, you increase accessibility and coverage. So what are some of the things that you guys discussed and that we discussed on the floor that don't cost a lot of money but would bring the cost down to the consumer?
We have so many ideas. I'm glad you brought this up because it's so important. We have many ideas that would help, again, continue the good quality care we have but be able to bring the cost down. One is just playing competition. And it's interesting. If you buy automobile insurance, you can buy in California, we can buy automobile insurance from a company in Oklahoma or vice versa, or any state. It's not that way in healthcare. Because of laws that the federal government has, every state has its own government regulations set up on healthcare regulations. Therefore, every state has its own healthcare insurance that is only for that state. If we were to open this up just to bring competition, how much that would do, bring a lower price, better quality. That's one thing we can do. Tort reform. Isn't it interesting? Now, we both talk to doctors all the time. I haven't had a doctor tell me that they don't, just by self-defense, run about every test they can think of, to not because they want to run extra tests, but to protect themselves from a possible lawsuit if they don't do something. And there's tort reform we could have. Isn't it interesting that there isn't anything of tort reform in any of the health care bill, either in the House or the Senate? I wonder if it's that these trial lawyers give almost close to 100% of their money to the other side, to the president and to their side. But anyway, nothing in tort reform. There's a number of areas like this. We can look at what's being done right. For example, there's different private sectors who self-insure, like Target or like Safeway, who have programs, wellness programs, where they say, and they use a carrot, not a stick like the federal government uses, but a carrot to say, we're going to check you out when we employ you. We're going to have you have a physical, and if we detect that your blood pressure is too high, or you have cholesterol count that's high, or perhaps you're overweight, and there's things that you can do to help so that your quality of life is better, and so the chance of you getting sick aren't as great. We're going to lower your premiums by X amount at the end of the year, just working with us on this. So there's a carrot, an initiative. And we've seen companies like Safeway, for example, who have actually, at a time when healthcare costs have been going up 8 to 10 to 12% a year, they've actually leveled off their healthcare costs. So there's a number of things, Tom, that we have as Republicans that we've been sponsoring that we can help legitimately bring down the cost of healthcare and still maintain the high quality care we have. I might mention a number of these, each of what I just mentioned, we had as amendments back in early August when this bill came before us in the Ways and Means. Not one of these amendments was accepted by the Democrat-controlled Ways and Means Committee.
Another one that always amazes me, because anybody that's ever run a business knows how much sense this makes. I'd like to get your reaction. The first one is associated health plans. The idea of just letting small companies combine into large purchasing pools so they've got the same kind of advantage in the marketplace that a big company does. Now, we've passed that 2 or 3 times in the House since I've been here, never been able to get it through the Senate. But why would you want to prevent small companies from combining together to get the best possible in price for their employees?
Tom, something that's so well known in your district, common sense. And maybe in our rural area, doesn't that just common sense? But yet, what you're saying is so basic, so fundamental. There's so many small businesses, like our small family business, and so many in Oklahoma in your district, that they don't have the large, like a Safeway or a Target or something, where they have access, where they can get their costs down. If they could just work together and band together with other associated industries or companies to do that, how they could be more competitive. And yet, something as fundamental as that, we have not been able to pass. And it's really unbelievable.
I think another one and there's an expense to this, so you'd have to phase it in. But we have a lot of Americans. Obviously, if you get your insurance through your employer, it's all done with pre-tax dollars. But if you're an individual purchaser in the market, and we have 20 million of those, your insurance is going to cost you a lot more because you've already paid your Social Security tax, your Medicare tax, your state taxes, your income tax, all of that before you're actually in the marketplace buying with your dollar the coverage you need for your family. So I've often wondered why, if it's okay to have some Americans, actually the majority, get their health insurance with pre-tax dollars, why shouldn't all Americans be able to do it that way?
You're absolutely right. And I think really, we've just talked about a number of different areas if we were to work on in policies that would help bring down healthcare costs. I think it's important to note, just working in this, I know you've noticed this, there isn't any one silver bullet. You just do one thing, turn it all over to the federal government, for example, and somehow all our problems are going to go away. But there's a number of things we can do that make sense, where we're tweaking a system that 80% of the American public is already happy with the health care they have. Let's tweak it in ways that we can make it better, that we can make it more competitive, where we can bring, if you will, common sense to how we're doing this. And this is the area we should be working. There's one other thing I'd like to mention. One of our amendments we have before our House is this government-run plan. An amendment that we had before the Ways and Means, we had that, okay, if we're going to have a government plan that so many people are opposed to, why don't we say that every member of Congress will have to have this same plan? Do you know we couldn't pass that? Wouldn't that seem fundamental? If this is so good to inflict on the American public, and yet that was voted down, something that if it's good enough for them, let's us take it. Evidently, it wasn't for our friends.
I think that's such an important point to make, because I used to make the same point at town hall meetings. I'd say, if you want to make sure this is really a good plan, you require that your senators and your congressmen be in this plan, particularly those that vote for it. If they're voting for it because it's going to help you, it should help them. They ought to be willing to be part of it. So it's just amazing. We're down to just a little bit of time here, and so I'm going to probably rein you in, but have you seen anything on the Senate side that makes you feel any better about what's happening?
Tom, it's interesting to watch this process. Again, with all the votes I mentioned, 81 votes in the House, 20 vote filibuster proof in the Senate. They should have been able to pass anything. The fact they haven't shows and it's only because of town hall meetings, the American public rising up, calling, demanding something better. What we're seeing is that the president's basically said, you've got to come up with something. Basically, we have to have a face saving. So we're seeing some pretty watered down legislation, it would seem, on the Senate side that we would never have dreamed of here a month ago or so. But my concern is still a great concern, Tom, and that is whatever they get, it's a beginning point. And with this, they can go, unless we completely turn it around after the next election or two, what they get, they can start with that to build on this to get back to the government plan they have. So it might look like many of the things we were most concerned about aren't there to begin with. But my concern, they will be there just with the bureaucracy of growing the system.
I think our listeners know now why I like you so much. And if we could just get you out of California, we'll run you for something in Oklahoma, statewide.
I'd feel right at home in Oklahoma, I know.
Well, in closing, Congressman, I just want to tell you again, we're out of time, but I really appreciate you being here. I know our listeners have enjoyed this particular episode of Cole on Congress. And I'm Congressman Tom Cole from our nation's capital. Thank you so much for joining us. And Wally, thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Tom.
Good to have you, my friend.
Good to be here with you.